Greetings, I'm Evan Swenson. I'm an author and a book publisher. I'm also a member of Author Masterminds, sponsors of Readers and Writers Book Club. Welcome to Readers and Writers Book Club's Conversation with an Author live event. You're invited to come along with us as we visit with and become better acquainted with another amazing Author Masterminds authors. Today we'll be talking with Author Masterminds author Steve Levi, master of the impossible crime. We'll be talking with Steve about how he became a published author, the agony and ecstasy of authorship. We'll also talk with Steve about his roots, his family, and how his life's twists and turns brought him to be known as master of the impossible crime. Before we begin the talk with Steve, here's this. We're going to have a door prize drawing today. The door prize will be this branded Readers and Writers Book Club cotton drawstring cinch backpack. You want to be here to learn more about Steve Levi and what it takes to become a published author, and what it's like to see your years of hard work and a bit of good luck turn into a book that sells at Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and everywhere good books are sold. And don't forget about the drawstring cinch backpack door prize. Now let's talk. Let's talk with Steve. Greetings, Steve. Welcome to Readers and Writers Book Club, sponsored by Author Masterminds.
Hey, I'm pleased to be here.
Hello, Steve. This is going to be fun today.
Okay.
We got some things different than what we've had before. We're trying to make this better all the time. We are making this better. We're not just trying, we're doing it. And part of this making it better today is we have our own PR director, Marianne Paul. That she's here all the time and she's kind of in the background and helping out. But I want to just introduce Marianne. We know her as an Author Mastermind member, but Marianne's career was in administration, spanned several decades. She had been an auditor for the Alaska Public Office Commission, the executive assistant to the president of the Anchorage Convention and Visitors Bureau, the business office manager for a country club in Del Rio, Texas, among other positions. She had a successful career in real estate and ended it only because she spent an entire year where she rarely saw her husband and young son. She ended her career in administration as a financial paraplanner for an investment manager. That's Marianne. I'm sure, Steve, you didn't know all that about Marianne, did you?
I do now.
Yeah. So we have a real life PR person here, and then adding to that, we have our co-host Gordon Parker. Many Author Masterminds don't know about Gordon. Gordon's first experience with a microphone came as an unpaid participant in a show for teenagers while still a student at East Anchorage High School. Later, he landed a paying job as a radio disc jockey while attending college in his native Louisiana. He soon switched to broadcast journalism, finding that to be more interesting. After graduating from college, Gordon worked at a radio station in Shreveport and in Milwaukee, with a detour of a few months in Juneau, Alaska, before returning home to Anchorage. He quickly landed a job at a major radio station and might be working there yet, but the pay was too low.
That's right.
Yeah, and when he asked the station manager to let him have a few sales accounts to augment his income, he was told he was too good on the air.
It's terrible to be talented.
So there you have it. Marianne and Gordon, I'm so pleased that you're here today to share this time.
I'm a little embarrassed because Marianne actually worked for a living.
Every once once in a while, you have to work for a living.
Every so often.
So
Every so
before we get to Steve, I have a question for Mary Ann. You worked for the, I didn't know this, for the Anchorage Visitors Convention Bureau, and you was worked for the president of the bureau. Who was the president at that time?
Bill Elander was my president at that
Okay,
point.
yeah, I know Bill.
I worked for him. But before that, before Bill came on board, I worked for Ren Bowman. Long story. And also Dana Brockway, who was the interim president.
Yeah, I know all of those.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I have history with them. Good for you. Yeah, that's nice.
Oh, I have history with, I tell you.
Yeah.
Some good, some bad. I bet, Steve, you may have had some history with some of those.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I suspect we all have, yes.
That's called a history, you know.
Okay, well, let's talk to Steve. Gordon, you and I have had an opportunity to look at some of Steve's background photo-wise. Let's start kind of at the beginning, I guess, Steve, if we could. Let's start right here. Steve, who are we looking at here? Who?
This guy is by the name of Cabot Russell. Cabot Russell was from Boston, and he was one of the white commanders of the Black Battalion, the 54th Fighting Battalion out of Boston. And the movie Glory, he's in the movie Glory, and he was killed at Fort Wagner. And so on my mother's side of the family, we go all the way back to Boston. One of my ancestors was actually on the Mayflower.
Wow.
And which is rather odd because when we start talking about my father is a Holocaust refugee. So it was when my mother and father got married, it was kind of an interracial marriage of that time.
So, this guy, your grandmother's uncle, Cabot Russell. Yeah, he was one of the white officers of the Massachusetts, an all-black Civil War battalion.
Correct. It was the first battalion of all black soldiers. And
Now,
they were down and they fought at Fort Wagner, and they were pretty much wiped out. He was killed with the troops there at Fort Wagner.
Now, you know that we published the book, Steve. Oh my gosh, it skipped my mind all of a sudden. Buffalo Soldiers.
Buffalo Soldiers, yeah.
No, so he was part of the Buffalo Soldiers.
Well, the Buffalo Soldiers were actually the soldiers in the West. So this is before the Buffalo Soldiers, because after the Civil War, those blacks that could not go back because they were slaves went, and they had military experience, went west. And when they went west, they were called Buffalo Soldiers. But this is a lot of the blacks that were in, the Fighting 54th probably ended up as Buffalo Soldiers. That's correct.
It was the Indians, actually, was it not, the Native Americans who began to call them Buffalo Soldiers because they had, before the war, they had never seen a black man. And all of a sudden here were these soldiers. Does that match your recollection, Steve?
Yeah, and the reason they called them Buffalo Soldiers because they had kinky, curly hair like the buffalo. That's where the name comes from.
Interesting.
I did a little research on the Buffalo Soldier, and you're right, Steve. That was part of it, but the other part is that the Buffalo Soldiers liked it maybe a little better. Is that the Indians thought that they were brave, like the buffalo.
That's probably true, but yes,
yeah.
but those that survived, those blacks that survived from the Fighting 54th, a lot of them probably ended up in the West.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
And that swung both ways as well. They had, as you point out, they had nothing to go back to. They had no jobs, no way to make a living. So they wandered west, and many of them joined the army. But when I was researching my first book, I also learned that by far the majority of the people in the South were not slave owners, but were poor people. And many of them joined the Confederate Army just to get 3 meals a day or even 1 meal a day. so the economics of that period and that war, when you dig down into it, it's pretty interesting.
You know, the number of slaves that were held on plantations only amounted to about 2% of the population. You know, the rest of the people were dirt poor.
And in my native state of Louisiana, there was only one time when the vote was held to whether or not to secede from the Union, and it barely passed. Barely. We would today call it a close election.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to interrupt for a minute. There are a lot of people here to say hello to you, Steve. Goodness.
Cool.
You've got Rich and Robin. Robin's here. And Greg and Jen Rodriguez and T. Martin O'Neill. Oh my gosh. And you've got a couple of questions. You ready to answer them?
Yeah, let's have some questions for Steve. Keep him awake.
Yeah, let's keep you awake over there. Rich Ritter asks, didn't the Buffalo Soldiers charge up San Juan Hill?
If you want to call them Buffalo Soldiers, that's correct. But the Buffalo Soldiers traditionally are those soldiers that were working with the cavalry in the West. And up on San Juan Hill, what happens is they preceded Theodore Roosevelt and the Rough Riders. And that is correct. I don't know if I'd call them Buffalo Soldiers, but definitely black soldiers.
Olin Hunt would call them Buffalo Soldiers. And he was the author of the book Buffalo Soldier, and that carried right on through the Second World War. He was the last of the Buffalo Soldiers, all black battalion in the Second World War.
You know, I was going to point out earlier that racial structure in the military was not changed until, I think, after World War II. Isn't that correct?
That is correct.
Yeah, they with segregated units until the Korean War, and Harry Truman, by executive order, just integrated it.
Okay, so Greg Leifer wants to know about Cowboys of the Sky, your book.
Right.
He wants to know if you're going to do any more aviation nonfiction. He likes the genre, of course.
Aviation writing, if you're not a pilot, is very strange because bush pilots will look at you and they will lie. And so you have to be very, very careful when you write books about pilots in Alaska, because if they think they can slip a lie by you, they will. So yes, I'm thinking about doing it, but you're always one of those kind of subjects where you have to be very, very careful.
I love that. They will look at you and they will lie. I wish I had said that. And as the old comedian Milton Berle used to say, and I will.
Yeah.
Well, you know,
flyer about aviation.
I'm sorry?
Evan used to fly. Do you think he would lie to you?
Every bush pilot has a story that gets better and better and better as the years go by. So let's not call it a lie. Let's just say embellishments.
You are a smooth talker.
Very well done.
I was not going to say anything, Steve. However, you recall when you published that Cowboys of the Sky, you had a serious error in there. Greg Leifer knows what I'm talking about, because you said something to the effect that the pilot took off downwind so that he could get more speed and take off faster. Now,
yeah, well, that's an error.
Mary Ann, you watch Greg's response over there on Facebook Live and see what he says about the taking off downwind to take off quicker.
I'm waiting.
Okay, when it comes up, he'll have a comment. If he doesn't, I sure will.
Yeah, you can't. Not every book is perfect.
Now, wait a minute.
Not every pilot is perfect.
Nobody told me we were going to talk about mistakes in our books now.
Oh yeah, let's not go there right now.
Steve, you and I share some background, both having worked in Juneau with and around the legislature. What have you? And I've read some of your stuff, but certainly not everything. Have you brought your experiences from that world into your writing at all?
Yeah, there's a book called Capital Punishment. If it's not published by it's available online, because when I finished being an aide, I found out that there are all kinds of people who had absolutely no idea how the legislature really works. And so I wrote it up, and it's written up from the inside from a legislative point of view. And there's all kinds of stuff that happens in the hallways that never, ever makes the press. And some of it is just unbelievable. I mean, it may be stupid, and you're saying, this is the dumbest thing that I have ever heard, but people are voting on it. And there's all kinds of things that happen. It's an excellent book for those people who want to understand how all legislatures work the same way. It's all people and people. It's handshakes, and it's nose-to-nose counting and nose-to-nose discussions. So yeah, and it's, to this day, I tell people some of the stories of things that I actually saw happen, and they look at you and they go, no way, that could never happen. But it did, and it's happening now in Washington, D.C. It's just a bigger pool.
Did you say pool or fool?
Yes.
Either one will work. Either one will work.
Most of the work goes on out in the halls or in the.
Let's get away from Juneau and Washington, D.C. a second. Let's come back to Steve Levi. What do we got here, Steve? This is not Juneau, and it's not Washington, D.C.
No, this is San Francisco after the quake and fire. My grandfather was tired of the East Coast, and he wanted to see the world. So what he did is he took the train as far west as he could, which at that time was Sacramento. Took the ferry to Benicia, and he wanted to see San Francisco. My grandfather was not a drinker, but he wanted to go out and see the town. So he put his clothes and his suitcase and everything into the hotel, and he walked out on town, and all of a sudden the earthquake hit. Completely wiped out the city. He lost all his clothes, everything. And he spent the next 2 weeks, he was sober. And at that time there were gangs of drunks, and they drafted him. And what he was doing, all kinds of odd things, like they were digging bodies out of buildings and stacking them like cordwood and burning them because they were afraid of typhoid and cholera. And he also became what he said he was a safe cooler, safe like something that you put your valuables in. And I didn't know what it was. And he said, well, when they go to a building, they would find a safe and they would pick it up. But you had to be careful, because if you opened the safe up, the way the safe is built, it has interlocking piece of iron on the inside. If you open it up, the iron on the inside is incredibly hot, and instead of opening up and finding stuff in there, what will happen is the air will suddenly rush in and you'll get an explosion and everything inside will burn. And so what he was doing is taking the safes and putting them in San Francisco Bay on ropes, and they would leave them in for about 30 hours, and then they pull out and put another one in. And I said, you really did that? And he said, yeah, I did that for about 4 days. And, from there, he was still broke. I mean, he had nothing. And from there, he went to Montana. And that's where he met my grandmother.
Now, Steve, is this the Montana that you're talking about?
Yeah, he had no money in Montana, and he was working as an assistant to an assistant. But the Homestead Act was there, and so he had to have some place to live. So he built himself a cabin on a homestead lot. He owned a homestead, and that's the cabin my grandfather built and lived in for about 10 years. And when he got married to my grandmother, that's where they lived for about 4 years. That's where my mother was born.
Wow. Gordon, that's as good or as bad, or whatever you want to say it, as Alaska. That's pretty bleak.
Hey, it keeps the snow out. Keeps the snow out.
Yeah, well, we got a lot of friends who had homesteads up here because that Homestead Act was still in effect in the early days of statehood. I think it no longer is, but.
All right, so you want your answer from Greg Leifer about the downwind faux
Oh,
pas?
yeah, let's hear that, Steve.
Okay, so Greg says, that's a great way to eat dirt.
Yeah, that's right.
And Robin wants to know if you have any other plans to write a maritime mystery. She said she really liked Clara Nevada.
I'm always looking for something that's completely different, and I'm looking for something that is a story. For those of you that don't know the Clara Nevada is Alaska's ghost ship. It sinks in 1898 with about 11,000 ounces of gold on it, and it comes back up in 1908. And the ship actually came up above the surface of the water, and the gold was gone. So what I did is I went ahead and figured it looked like a robbery to me, so I took everybody's name that I could find that had been on the ship, and the ship goes down in 1898. And I compared that name to the census in 1900, and I got one hit. It's the captain, and he's got a brand new steamboat up on the Yukon River. So yes, if I can find something else like that, I will. It's very fascinating because what happens is with each passing day, more and more material gets put on the internet. We are about to enter a golden age of history and literature because a lot of the stuff that was unknown to writers and historians 5 years ago now is public information. So yeah, all of a sudden, all of these ships and all of these stories that have been lost for so many years are now in the public domain. So yeah, I'm always looking for something that's new and different. Yes.
And you're right, the Google makes it so much easier.
Yeah, that's my grandfather. This is the one who lived in that homestead. This is my mother's father who lived in that homestead.
This is the guy that lived in the cabin?
He lived in the cabin, and they lived in, oddly, they lived in the cabin until the Depression, and then he got a job working in the post office in Helena. And so they left Lewistown, which is a little tiny town. They went 100 miles away to Helena, and that's where he worked in Helena from the 1930s all the way to when he retired in the 60s.
So, Mary Ann, do you understand what Greg Leifer said in answer to?
Oh, I truly did, yes. You don't
Okay.
want to take off with a tailwind. You're going to crash.
Yeah, what you want to do is you want to go into the wind. You want to take off into the wind, because then what will happen is the wind will help you rise. If you
I know
take
this
off
because
with
my-
the wind, what happens is
Yeah.
you can't do that. That's not
Yeah, my husband is, was a flight engineer on C-130, so I know quite a bit about
Mhm.
more than I need to know about aviation. Yeah.
Steve, let's go back to your family for a second.
Okay, now this is my father's side of the family. Okay, my father came from an incredibly rich Italian Jewish family. And what you're looking at here is this is the family, and that's in their garden, and they own the entire block. This is a 3-story building, and this is the garden in the bottom. My father is the man on the far left, kind of leaning with his hands crossed. And my father's father is second from the right. And my grandfather and his brother married my grandmother and her sister. And that's the way that it was, because these were very, very wealthy family, and they wanted to make sure the money stayed in the family. In today's dollars, these people were probably worth around $100 million. And they had the largest high fashion women's design firm in Torino. And Torino was the 3rd largest city in Italy. So we're talking a lot of money. And this picture was taken in about 1934. And in 1939, half of them were in the camps and dead. My dad is a refugee. My dad made it to New York with his brother and my grandparents, and they landed with $25,000. Worst time in the world. They were lucky that they made it out, but it's the worst time in the world to come because they didn't speak English. They were enemy aliens. They were immigrants. They were refugees. And worst of all, they were Jewish. And that at that time, that was the group that was discriminated against.
Wow.
Your family knew the true meaning of oppression.
Oh, yeah.
And yet y'all overcame it and survived well.
Well, the most important thing that my dad gave the family is the only one thing that you can that's guaranteed is that any education you get, you have forever. And so anytime you get a chance to learn something, you learn it. You learn it whether it's sewing on a button or reading a book on history or, watching a television program that teaches you something. Anything that you can put between your ears will be yours forever. Everything else can be stolen, taken, and disappear.
Steve, you mentioned the high fashion. Tell us again about that. That was in Italy?
In Torino, Italy, is the 3rd largest city in Italy. That the company that the family ran was a fashion design. It made high fashion women's clothing. There's some right there. And what they would do is they owned the building, they owned the machines, they owned everything. And they would make these, and these are from 1925, about 1925, 1930. And these are the designs that they made, and they sold them on the market to the rich. And that's where they made their money. And they made their money until 1939 when the Mussolini's government came in and simply took the business. They just came in one day and said, the business is ours. That's it.
Marianne, I don't follow fashion all that much, but that looks like that could be today. Is that that's something you'd go shopping for today?
I'd wear these today. I'm not sure our younger generation would. But yeah, this is really classic clothes. They just go on and on. I would love it, especially the one on the far left here on my screen.
Yeah.
That's gorgeous.
Yeah.
Beautiful stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, and by the way, Greg Leifer wants to tell you something here that might help you with another one, I guess, about your maritime. He said when he was commercial fishing in the 70s, he heard about a historic wreck of an outer island near Prince of Wales that reportedly had a fortune in silver bullion aboard. He never confirmed it was true.
Don't know, but if he gives me the name, I'll let him know as soon as I dig it up, so to speak.
So to speak.
Yeah, that's half of me says I'm skeptical because anything coming out of Alaska is gold. And so if you said that it had gold on it, I would say, yeah, that sounds legit. But silver, we don't have a lot of, I don't think we have any silver up here.
I've never heard of a silver mine here.
Yeah, a lot of gold, lead, zinc, and molybdenum, but silver, no. But
and graphite, graphite also.
Yeah, give me the name of the ship and I will get back with him.
We heard that.
Okay.
Steve,
Robin wants to know if you've ever written about your family history. She said it is very interesting. She said
about the history of what?
Your family history.
European history?
Your family's history.
Yes, if you can look up, when you go on the internet, look up the memoirs of an Italian Jewish Holocaust refugee by Mario Levi. Before my dad died, I recorded him and then I wrote up the book. And so you can find my father's story because he was on the last train out of Italy before Italy went to war in September of '39. And the next June, when the Nazis were closing in on Paris, he was in the last train out of Free Paris and the last boat out of Free France. So he barely made it out, barely made it out. And this would be my great grandfather. These are the two people who started that business and ran it into 1939. And when during the war, they tried to get out and he died in a slave labor camp. He was 93 years old and they still had him out digging ditches. And she was transported just before the Allies took central Italy. She was transported to Auschwitz where she was gassed. So she made it almost to the end of the war.
Boy, you really do know a lot of the history of your family, Steve, and what a history.
It made me what I am today.
Yeah, if you'd look back on your family and we hear these stories, Steve, what would be one of the most interesting characters or incident or story that you could have that you kind of keep in your mind all the time, maybe share it around? What would be that?
I'm always working on about a dozen things at a time. And there are all kinds of interesting people out there that I'd like to do work on. And sometimes there just isn't enough information. Sometimes they've already done their autobiography and you can't do anything about it. And the people that I'm looking for, the people that I want to do are the people who have quite literally disappeared until the internet came out. I did a biography on a bush pilot out of Kotzebue. And the reason nobody had done anything on him is because there's no newspaper in Kotzebue. They couldn't find any letters on him from Kotzebue. Most of the people lied about him when I talked to him. And what I had to do is I had to do about 60 interviews of people to try to put the pieces together. And that's the kind of a project that I like because I'm the only one that's willing to put the time in to do it. And once you have done it, then you've got something that no one else has. Everybody wants to do it quickly. Go through and look at one file, on a trial and then write it up. I don't like that because I want something different.
Yeah, I was thinking more of your family, some of the stories from your family that are characters in your family, incidents that might have struck you that's in your memory that you share with us.
We knew from my dad, they knew that the fascists were going to go ahead and raid them. They knew it. And what they did is they took the stuff that was valuable to them, valuable in the sense it's family oriented, and they took it out and they buried it someplace or put it in a cave someplace. And we know that because at the end of the war, all of a sudden, my dad got basically a couple of boxes full of these things that came back. And I'd like to go back to find out who actually buried it, how they buried it, because, Italy is Italy is like a small town. Everybody knows everybody else. And so to have anybody like rich Jews go out and take stuff and then hide them someplace and have them survive the war, that was something else. That is quite amazing.
That would be. Yeah, that's a nice story, Steve. Thank you. There are a lot of stories in your history that's interesting. Yeah,
This is my father. My father could not get a job in New York because he was Jewish and didn't speak English. And so he joined the American Army. And he was on his way to Bataan, and the Japanese hit Pearl Harbor. So he was stationed in Pearl Harbor to clean up. And while they were on maneuvers, he was either riding on a Sherman tank, he was riding on a tank or walking beside it, and the tank rolled over on him and knocked all his teeth out, broke his leg, broke his ribs, and he spent 18 months in the hospital. And, I never saw my dad walk. My dad always had his right leg was solid from the toes to the hip. I mean, he walked, but he was clearly handicapped. And that's the only picture I've ever seen of my dad in crutches. And I'll tell you, in all the years that I knew my dad, he never once complained about his leg. It was, it was just, that's the way it was, and so that's the way it was.
Now this happened in Hawaii?
Hawaii. He was on maneuvers in Hawaii, getting ready to go into the South Pacific, and the tank rolled
on him. Yeah, the Battle of Hawaii.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
it was interesting because he was sent to St. Louis, and he saw the movie 4th of July with Tom Cruise. And he said, it was just as miserable there then as it was in the movie. He said the movie really captured how miserable that place was.
Steve, tell us about this couple.
This is my father on the left and my mother on the right. And, here we have an Italian Jewish refugee marrying a WASP from Montana. Yeah. And this is 1945, right at the end of the war. The war had just finished. And my dad had been a lawyer in Italy, and he could not be a lawyer in America, so he had to go back to school. And he went back on the GI Bill and became a psychologist. And he worked as a psychologist, from 1950 until he retired in 1980, whatever.
So if I have this right, then, Steve, you'd be an interracial couple, your parents,
right.
Then at that time.
For its time, it was a mixed. Yeah. In that time, it was a mixed marriage.
Uh-huh. So this is the one that interests me, Steve. This picture. Oh, I get a kick out of this. Now, who's this guy, Steve?
Yeah, that's me. That's the first picture I can remember of me, and I don't remember taking that picture, but I keep looking at that shirt and saying, even then I like short sleeve shirts. That was in Sacramento, and Sacramento was hot. And I always remember Sacramento being very hot, and I associate short sleeve shirts with hot. So even when I'm here in Alaska, when I want to think hot when it's cold outside, I always wear a short sleeve shirt.
Now, you weren't born in California, though.
I was born in Chicago. My dad worked on grants. And so he would be 3 years in one place, and then the grant would come out, and then we'd move. So we moved from Chicago to Colorado Springs, to Reno, Nevada, to Sacramento. And Sacramento was kind of where I grew up.
So this is maybe part of your growing up. Is that what you're telling me? Who are these guys?
Well, That's me in the center. This is our home in Sacramento. And these are my two brothers. And you can see it's a tough neighborhood because I've got a gun on.
You're armed.
Yeah, I'm armed. And this is in our backyard. And, you know, we had a little garden and my mom planted some fruit trees. And we had a guinea pig and a dog and a cat. I mean, we had everything that you can have.
So I love the expressions on the face. If you look at your face, Steve, you're clearly saying, I'm the big brother, I'm in charge. But then if you look to your brother on your left, you kind of get the idea he's thinking, yeah, right.
The same then as today. He's got the same attitude today. And the one on the right is Mark, and his attitude is, I don't need you guys, man. I'm on my own.
Yeah.
But I noticed that both you and your brother were carrying sticks.
If you can't see it from here, but if you look on the other side, if you could have looked on the other side of that fence, there is in what we call an alley, but it's basically an area that they wanted to drive if they had to get into the back of the houses with a fire truck, they could drive there. And it was all overgrown, and there were snakes in there, and there was all kinds of berries and everything else. And you would use the stick over there, you know, to kind of move the grass around just to make sure there wasn't a snake where you were going to step.
So what's one of the interesting stories that you'd have, Steve, growing up with your brothers?
We had all kinds of fun because I was always, you know, I was almost 4 years older than my next brother down and 8 years older than the next one down. So what happens is I was always into things that they never understood. You know, because I was a swimmer, and they'd say, "You're a swimmer? Why would you want to be a swimmer?" This is California, you know, and that's what you do, you know. And they had absolutely no interest in sports at all, and they had absolutely no interest in writing and history, you know. So it's very odd in my family because I send my family books and they say, "Gee, that's very nice, Steve." And I know they don't read them, but it's kind of like, hey, you know, that's what I do.
Now, this is your family. This is you and your
yeah, this is the total
brother,
family.
sister.
Yeah, that's my father and mother. This is in about 1964. I was in high school, and we can see that my sister down there on the bottom left had been born by then. And it's interesting because I like this particular picture is because we were camping. Remember I told you my father had a leg that was solid from the toes to the ball joint, and what happened is he had no problem at all hiking out with us and camping with us, and it was really wonderful to be out in the wilderness with your dad. And also looking back on it, I mean, he was just like every other father, he just had the leg that was a little different.
And now that photo, Steve, was in California, Sacramento?
That would have been in Sacramento, right?
Uh-huh. So let's move on a little bit and kind of get up to date. Here's a picture of Steve, more up to date. Looks like you.
Yeah, this is me. One of the things that I'm working on right now is the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment is coming up this year. And my grandmother was a suffragette, and most of the people in her generation were women who were saying, you know, we deserve to be paid the same as men. We deserve the right to vote. We deserve the right to inherit our own property. All of the things that women today have, that a lot of young women don't understand that before 1919, they didn't have those rights. And the grandmothers, their grandmothers and great grandmothers, these people walked the streets, knocked on doors. They put up with grief to be able to say, we want to make sure this 19th Amendment goes. We deserve rights just like you men have. You know, and so I got this picture and we made this little poster, and I like it because it's very clear. Don't you ever, when it comes to history, never forget what your grandmother did for you. Your grandmother is long gone, but everything that she did, you know, she laid the groundwork for the women of today to make sure they get paid the same amount. They can get promotions just like men, that they can go ahead and inherit property, you know, because they didn't have those rights in 101 years ago. They did not have those rights.
So Steve, this picture is in a cemetery, is it not?
In a cemetery?
Uh-huh. Where is this?
They're marching in the street. I don't remember.
No. I mean the picture where you're standing.
No, that's on the park strip in Anchorage.
Oh, on the park strip. Okay.
Right, that's on the park strip in Anchorage. Because they had a celebration there, and I was asked if I could come up with something that they could use as a poster, and that's what I came up with. And they really liked it, and they donated it to the University of Alaska. Interestingly enough,
They donated the poster.
right? Because they're going to do a centennial of the 19th Amendment in the library, and that was one of the posters they're going to be using.
Okay, well let's get some humor in here. Gordon,
right.
get ready, because we're going to have to talk about this. So, are you ready, Gordon?
I'm ready.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is down your alley, Gordon. This is your time to talk. You're the political guy.
This is Steve's wife, Sue, who is an old friend of mine from Juneau. We worked on legislative staff together many, many years ago. And of course, when I first met Stu, I had no idea he was married to Sue, but she's a delightful person. And that picture is just Sue. I think it's just Sue. It's a great picture.
Well, one of the most important things about Sue and I, particularly about me, is that if you don't have a sense of humor, you're going to find me very difficult to deal with, because my attitude is that if you don't get a laugh in a day, it's a tough day, you know. And so Sue doesn't know that this is going to be here, so she's going to be very surprised. But I like it is because it kind of encapsulates the way that our marriage is, and that we both have a good time. And when in doubt, laugh.
Well, this will make you laugh. I hope Sue laughs when she sees this, Steve.
Well, she has to, because it's already on the air.
Okay.
And Evan, if she doesn't, it's Steve who has the problem, not you and me.
Yeah, right. So.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. Marianne, is there anything over there on Facebook live that we need to address before?
Well, T. Martin O'Neill put something in here, but I wasn't sure if you want. you know how Marty is. Anyway,
let's have it. We're getting something funny right now. Anyway, let's have.
Okay, you teach part-time. This is a two-parter, Steve.
Okay.
You teach part-time. What is your favorite subject? And then let me go on from there. Going back to Louisiana in the Civil War, he was preparing notes for a series of lessons on the Civil War and found out the largest cause of, in quotes, injury to North, South, and English sailors was, here we go, here's Marty, VD. This problem forced New Orleans to be off limits during the Civil War and the War of 1812.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I say.
What was the first? The first question was what?
Yeah, let's go back to the first question.
Oh, favorite subject.
Yes.
I'm a little different. They have when I was substitute teacher, I like to have the resource class. The resource class are the students who were difficult. In other words, their special education are the kiddos that are in the wheelchairs. They're autistic, and then there's what are called life skills students. These are students who are mentally incapacitated, but they've got the ability to get a job, like Down syndrome. You know, they can hold a job, but you kind of have to hold their hands. Resource kids are kids that are a problem in class. And I don't mind resource classes is because it's not that I ever was that way, but I understand why they're there. They are bored. They're absolutely bored just bored. And so when you get there, what happens is this is what you have to teach them, but you don't have to teach them out of a book. What you do is you just say, okay, this is what we have to learn today. Let's see if I can figure out a different way to teach what I'm supposed to reach, rather than have them open the book and go to page 28, and answer the questions. Because, just because I'm a substitute teacher doesn't mean that I turn my mind off when I walk into a classroom. And as far as his second question is, when you start looking at any part of this war, you find out that more people died off the battlefield than died on the battlefield. And the further back you go, the greater the numbers are. When it comes to venereal diseases, everybody had them. Everybody has them. The Civil War, they had quite a few of them because there was no cure for them. Joe Hooker came to Washington, D.C., it was famously said that, everybody that wanted to get laid could get laid, and the prostitutes just flowed into the city, and that's where the word hooker comes from, because they were Joe Hooker's hookers. So yes, there's quite a bit. And interestingly enough, if anybody is interested, email me. I was in North Carolina on the Outer Banks within the last month or so, and they had a list of prisoners of war, Confederate prisoners of war that were taken in the Battle of Hatteras. And they had all their names listed on the wall. And about halfway down are 4 blacks. And you look at it and you're saying, black prisoners of war? And 2 of them were listed as slaves and 2 of them were listed as free. And that blew my mind, because I was under the impression that everybody in the Southern Army that was taken as a prisoner of war was white. And that's one of those things in history you look at and you say, let's do a little research here.
There's a story there, Steve.
Yes, I know, but I'm going to have to go back and take a look at it, because those apparently those 4 blacks made it through the war because they were patriated. So what'll happen is they probably have ancestors that have some great stories to tell.
Could they have possibly been with your grandfather? Go ahead, Gordon.
I think that bears some research. It would be interesting, because there were black soldiers who fought for the South. And if memory serves me correctly, at one point, the Confederate government offered to free any slaves who would fight for the Confederate Army. But that would be some interesting research to follow up on.
I got something here that is going to take a minute, and I'm going to see if we can make it work. If it doesn't work, why, we'll go someplace else. But let's look at this and see if we can make this work.
No choice. I did not want to spend my life being normal, figuring out how to make it through the day without being bored.
We'll start that over.
I was born with a cruel affliction. I wanted every day in my life to be different. It didn't take me long to learn just how odd I was, so I took up writing at an early age. I became a writer because I had no choice. I did not want to spend my life being normal, figuring out how to make it through the day without being bored. By being a writer, I can make every second of the day count. Even when I am revising one of my books, I am creating something new, one letter or phrase at a time. I do not have downtime. While the front of my mind is concentrating on the road ahead as I drive to the store, the rest of my brain is churning ideas, concepts, plot lines. I won't know what my brain has in store for me until my fingers hit the keyboard. And I must say, I am absolutely amazed at what explodes out of my subconscious. As a writer, I have come to grips with my cruel affliction. No 2 days are the same, or even close to being similar. One day, I, as the detective, am trying to discover how a 737 with no pilot, crew, or passengers can land in Anchorage. The next day, I am on the planet Cerberus, where giant sea scorpions are marauding through mining settlements on land. By the end of the week, it's a comedy of 4 octogenarian Egyptologists smuggling legal artifacts. Saturday, where I am examining the wreck reports of a ghost ship. Sunday, I'm working on the Alaska Gold Rush saga of how a boomtown went ghost. Every day is different, and now, to tell the truth, I am quite happy with my affliction.
Okay.
I haven't seen that in a while.
How about that? Gordon, when you were in broadcast,
Yes, sir.
was there ever times when they came to the point and then they said, well, we're going to stop here for a commercial?
Oh, yeah. That happened a few times.
So how did you lead up to that when you was...
Well, let me tell you just a really quick story. I was working in college as a disc jockey, and one of the owners of the station, it was his big deal. He did a 30-minute newscast at 6 o'clock, which of course we don't do that anymore in broadcasting, but it was a big deal. And one day he got stuck out of town and he called me and said, Gordon, you have to do it. Now, this is a big thing for a young disc jockey. So I spent quite a bit of time gathering up all my news ready for 30 minutes on the air. I sit down in front of the microphone. The guy running the keyboard does one of these, like you're live. And I started reading, and the guy who just pointed to me had walked in with his cigarette lighter and set my news on fire. So that was my introduction to broadcast journalism. And I don't think that came anywhere close to answering your question, but
No.
it is a true story.
Okay, so in a moment, Gordon, I'm going to show a slide of 3 of Steve's books. And so when I show that, while you be prepared, I'm not going to burn the script because you don't have one.
Okay.
So, but you be prepared to give the commercial for Steve's 3 books. So you're not going to know what those 3 books are until you see them. So you get ready to. We'll see just how good you are, Gordon. I mean, well, this is the test. If you pass, we'll keep you for next time.
All right. How much does this gig pay anyway? I don't know.
I was going to say, Gordon, this is why you make the big bucks, Gordon.
Yeah, this is it. This is the fame and all that stuff. Marianne, is there anything else out there before we need to get Gordon the opportunity to show his mettle?
T. Martin O'Neill said you have an awesome affliction. I agree with him. Yeah.
Okay.
No, but don't forget to do the giveaway.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, you ready, Gordon?
Oh, you're going to do, okay, sure.
Okay, here you go.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, the world-renowned authors' books, Phantom Purloiners, The Deserted Airlines, and the matter of the dematerializing armored car, which is my personal favorite, are standing by. Run. Don't walk to your local bookstore and pick up all 3.
Thank
Wow.
you very much. I agree with you.
How do you like that, Steve?
Well done.
I like that. That was great.
Wow. Gordon?
Hiring Gordon to do this some more.
Do
Yeah.
I get a raise?
Oh, yeah.
Sure, we'll double what you made so far.
All right.
Yeah.
You can
Yeah,
double.
Gordon, you next time you get paid double.
All right, man, I'm telling you. And we'll share this bottle of wine sitting behind me there.
Okay,
Yeah.
hey, okay, not a problem there at all.
Yeah. Steve, any last remarks that you'd like to give before we move on?
Well, I think the most important thing for me to say is my motto is that if you don't have something unique, you have nothing. And I try to make everything I write completely different than everything I've ever read. And I try to surprise myself so that when you pick up my short stories or my novels, it's something that you have never read before.
Steve, I've heard you say that many, many times, and I want you to say it again, and I want you to just change it a little bit.
Okay.
Okay, you say, I try. I want you to leave I try out
Mm-hmm.
and just say I do. And let me hear that again without I try. See if you can do that.
I make the most. I write the most unusual. I write something. I write the most unusual books and short stories possible. I make sure that I have not seen or read anything that I include in my books. They are unique. If you write unique, you have something. If you are not writing something unique, you are just one of the crowd.
How about that? That was good. That was unrehearsed too, Steve.
Okay.
Very.
Okay.
Well said.
Yeah.
And Robin wants to know if Gordon loans his talents out. So do I. I want to know that too.
Yeah, well, at my usual rates, same thing I'm getting paid here now today. Or double. Actually, now we're double.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Now you've got this put on your resume, Gordon. Steve, thank you for being here. And Gordon and Marianne, thank you.
Don't forget the giveaway, Evan.
What's that?
Don't you have a giveaway?
I didn't hear that. Say it again.
Don't you have a bag to give away?
Oh, yes, but it's on the Facebook.
Okay.
And
Never
people
mind.
have been able to, oh yeah, thanks for bringing it up. It's on Facebook. It's automatic. Members of the book club have had 4 days that they could join for the raffle, the contest. What are we drawing, as we call it? And so it will be announced right there. You notice that Jen Rodriguez was on with us, and she's in charge of that. And boy, she does a good job. So it's going to be fun to see who entered the drawing and who won, and we'll post it right there, and we'll be sending that out to them. And I will say also that when they get the prize, there'll be a little surprise in there too, something that they didn't expect. So we'll add to it. So I think that Jen says that drawing will be, it still has a few more minutes to do it, and then it expires. So just look on the Facebook Readers and Writers and join the drawing, and you'll get the string pack. Nice looking. It's handy. You know, nowadays people, the grocery stores don't give out sacks anymore, bags. You have to buy them. And so anyway, when I went and got my new computer, by the way, they never gave me a bag to carry it out in. It was just a small little computer. And I said, I'm not walking out of here with just carrying this thing. And they said, well, the bags are 10 cents. And Lois was with me, and I said, you have a dime? And she says, I have 10 pennies. And she got them out, and the clerk at the Mac store on Fifth Avenue in Anchorage took her 10 pennies and gave us the bag to carry home the $3,000 computer. Now, there you have it. Steve, thank you for being here.
Okay, thank you all.
You bet.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Any
Steve.
questions? Shoot me
and-
an email at Author Masterminds.
Yeah, we'll talk later. Thank you very much. In the meantime, though, keep in touch.